welcome you. I'm a volunteer here today. So if you have some questions throughout the day, if you see someone with a volunteer today, feel free to ask. Some housekeeping rules, come on in, please find a seat. There's some more over here in the corner. The bathrooms are right here, so we'll know if you're going.
Pictures.
And at the V, see, I'm going to have you pass these around. Just take someone to pass it. This is an evaluation form. It's very important that we get feedback. So at the end of this hour, I will be handing you out a certificate when Dr. Ballou is finished, and I'd like you to hand in this so it's an even exchange. Make sure that you hand in the evaluation form. Let's see what else. You all have schedules. Lunch will be served. Light lunch out in the main area again where you had coffee this morning. And your certificates will all be handed out at the end of each presentation by the volunteer there. I met Dr. Ballou. I just found out, I couldn't remember the year. I guess it was 95. He was a student, I was a student. I was graduating and he was coming in. And he was volunteering for everything. And I thought, how do you work, go to school, and then volunteer for all these things? But he did. He was really effective helping students with things and being on the alumni organization committee, get an alumni group going, everything. So that's pretty amazing. Dr. Adlerian is now, Dr. Ballou is now the Adlerian program director, and he's a faculty member here at Adler Graduate School. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist in private practice in River Falls, Wisconsin. He's a state-approved supervisor for the Minnesota Board of Behavioral Health and Therapy and the Board of Marriage and Family Therapy. Currently, Dr. Ballou teaches Introduction to Adlerian Psychology and Child Guidance, the Psychodynamics of Psychopathology, and Clinical Treatment Planning and Counseling and Psychotherapy. He's the faculty advisor to 40 students. He supervises graduate research papers. He's a member of numerous committees and assistant president and academic vice president on curriculum and institutional matters. Please welcome Dr. Roger Ballou.
Thank you, Dave. Well, good. I like this area better. We got in this morning, and I guess the lights aren't working down in this end, and I thought, oh my gosh, this would be odd to have a program in the darkness, so we moved to the light. So there are some people coming. Drift over this way, and I've got some more handouts up here. There's some on a chair back there. There were. Yeah, there's still some back. Well, I'd like to start by having each person in the room stand and look at all of you and say, good morning, my name is. Now, you say your name. You don't just say, good morning, my name is. Good morning, my name is Roger, you see, like that, because I want you all to hear each other's voices, that's all. So we'll start with Virginia.
Oh, okay.
Good morning, my name is Virginia.
Very nice.
Yes, right
My name
there.
is Amy. Good morning, my name is Mona.
Good morning, my name is Karen.
Good morning, my name is Esther.
Good morning, my name is Jer.
Good morning, my name is Makoto.
Good morning, my name is Terry.
Good morning, my name is Vicki.
Good morning, my name is Dave.
Good morning, my name is Judy.
Good morning, my name is Margaret, and I'm hard of hearing, so if everybody speaks up, it would help me, please.
Great, good, okay.
Good morning, my name is Carolyn. Good morning, my name is Jocelyn.
Good morning, my name is Mary.
Good morning, my name is Leland.
Good morning, my name is Joe.
Good morning, I'm Jan. Roger, you're awesome. I'm so glad to see you.
Nice to see you. We wore purple.
Must be something significant.
Are you gonna be a deal?
Good morning, my name is Dave.
Dave?
Good morning, my name is Lindsay.
Good morning, my name is Michael.
Good morning, my name is Diane.
Good morning, my name is Reagan.
Good morning, my name is Nick.
Good morning, my name is Shelley.
Good morning, my name is Catherine.
Good morning, my name is Anna.
Good morning, my name is Bonnie.
Good morning, my name is Teresa.
Did you introduce yourself?
I did. Good morning. I'm Dave.
Yeah. Well, there, our brains have all connected. I've been reading lately quite a bit about neuroscience, and there's some theory that all of our brains are sort of interconnected somehow, so that you go brain to brain, and that's how you live your life, is brain to brain. How did this? I think the Student Association had this idea. They'd like to do this Masters Weekend on social interest. And so various people got asked to talk about it, and I guess it's kind of one of the kickoff talks. I was asked to talk about the origins of social interest. What is the historical context for this? And so that's what I'll present to you today, briefly. I think I'll probably take about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we can just do Q&A, and then if I let you go early, you'll be the first out for the coffee break. You don't have to wait in line. So, thank you for introducing yourselves. I want to get something straight, though, and that's how you pronounce this word. This is the phonetic pronunciation. Now, I'm not sure, I don't want to assume everybody here is from an Adlerian background, so what I'll tell you is that this term that we use, social interest, it's interesting. It was kind of a default term. Is everybody here fluent in German? Do we have any fluent German speakers? Okay. I know about 4 or 5 words in German, but I can pronounce one really, really well, and that's this word we're talking about today. As a matter of fact, a funny story, I was in Switzerland for the ACASI conference in the year 2000, and you know, it was a mix of, about 350 people there, a mix of German speakers and English speakers, and then people, you know, who knew either language, but that may not have been their first language. And it was near the end of the ACASI event, and it was one night when everybody was together, and this German businessman who was there, who was absolutely fluent in both languages. In fact, he was so fluent that I would not have known that he was German. He spoke English that well. But at one point he got up and kind of kiddingly said, you know, this is the 350 people gathered in the room together. He said, I want to tell you English speakers that only indirectly does this word have anything to do with the petroleum industry. Because what you say is Gemeinschaftsgefühl, or you'll say fuel. You'll put this F-U-E-L at the end of it. And that's not how it's pronounced. Am I correct? So, yes, it's not Gemeinschaftsgefühl. You know, so he made this remark, you know, in the context of the petroleum industry. I thought it was really clever. What he got us to say was Gefühl. Would that be correct? Gemeinschaftsgefühl is how the word is. So what we have is kind of like a fula with this little bit of an at the end. So I'm going to ask you to pronounce it. Okay. Now phonetically, this is the term. This is the German word that got translated loosely into social interest. Gemeinschaftsgefühl. Okay, now on the cue, I'll count to 3, and I would like us all to say it that way. And you have to kind of get this little "ful" at the end, okay? Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Gemeinschaftsgefühl.
It sounds Norwegian there.
Does it? How? Okay. Yes. So the way the story goes is Adler started introducing this concept really about 1908. He was still in the Freudian circle. But as much as people were talking about the kind of push, they were saying drives. I think that we have a different understanding even of the word drives today. What I think they were really meaning a lot was pushes. You're sort of pushed from underneath, from within, by these instincts, by these needs, if you will. And Adler, it was about 1908, began to introduce the concept of, it might be as much as a pull as it is a push. That there's a social context that surrounds this word, or surrounds this concept, you know. And he at that time was speaking in terms of what he called, I'll talk about in a few minutes, the aggression drive. So that was the first label that Adler gave this dynamic, which later became social interest. It was really in the original state vernacular for him, the aggression drive. But he started using this word Gemeinschaftsgefühl in his work. It was certainly after the break with Freud. Now we're into the 1920s, and he was at this time now starting to move to different countries as a sort of a guest lecturer. And Dennis Forbes and his wife Phyllis Batome, for instance, hosted him frequently in England, and he would speak in London. And his English wasn't particularly good at this point in time, and he's still trying to grapple with getting audiences to understand Gemeinschaftsgefühl. Well, I almost think it was one of these things where there was kind of constant interplay around the term, and the English speakers were sort of saying, it sounds like you're saying something like social interest. And I almost feel like Adler might have said, listen, if you get the meaning, and that's what you want to call it, let's call it that. You know, sort of surrender to the other language, if you will. Because really, again, and I think we're correct about this, there is no way you can really translate Gemeinschaftsgefühl into some kind of a real English term or word. Actually, to the German speakers, it almost conveys more of a feeling than it is really a word. It's more of a feeling. Please comment.
Which is what I've been thinking, because of the German context.
Speak loudly so people can hear you.
I'll strange it up, I got this from a British comedy, but I learned their word for compassion, or phrase for compassion over in England, is fellow feeling.
Fellow feeling, correct.
And gemein, that's together.
Together.
Gemeinschaft. And then Gefühl, that is feeling.
Feeling.
So literally, as the English might say it, fellow feeling.
Fellow feeling.
Feeling for those around you.
Feeling for those around
that's
you.
What we're talking about with social interest.
That is correct.
Social interest is kind of, to me, is this big abstract thing. But feeling for your fellows, that's exactly what we're talking about.
That's exactly what we're talking about, Brett. Did you all hear that? Yeah, good. A couple more comments. Now, I'm going to take only a few comments as I go because I want to finish the presentation, then we'll do Q&A. But I'm going to get us started here. Jared.
Yeah, actually, I just heard this recently. I was talking, my mother recently remarried. She was widowed, and she married a widower who's a retired Lutheran minister who actually, German was his first language. He grew up on the plains of North Dakota. And I was talking to him about Gemeinschaftsgefühl, and he said, oh yeah, he said that in Germany, and then I'm thinking about how Adler, became Lutheran early on, and kind of hoped that his ideas would be really embraced by Lutherans, that Gemeinschaft is the name for a congregation.
Ah. Yeah.
So in a sense, so it's a feeling of, sort of a congregation.
Great. Very good. Yes, this all weaves together. Jan.
Coming down, let's just get my boss here.
You what?
I had my hand up for John.
Oh, okay. That's who we were waiting. Very nice. Good. Well,
that's
right.
demonstrating social interest.
It's demonstrating.
So let me take you through a little bit of the, some of this will be in the handout. I guess about 5 or 7 years ago, I got pretty proficient in PowerPoint, and then decided that in these kinds of settings I would not use it. Because I think learning sometimes is eye to eye and not so much looking at a screen. So for this morning, I thought, I think we'll just have a conversation about this. Many of you know this, you're already engaged with the material, you're not hearing something for the first time. So I'm going to kind of blaze through and then we'll talk, and that's how we'll learn. But I did do a handout for you. Certainly, if you want to study this whole concept of social interest and its origins and its history, Heinz Ansbacher's work is the place to go. He wrote, probably 8 or 10 articles, not all published in Adlerian publications, about this term and about how it got going and what its origins are. Heinz Ansbacher, faculty members at the University of Vermont for many, many years. And Heinz really was the one who more devoted himself to the kind of the essence of the language of Adler. And so what I did, just to get you started, is I went to online, the dictionary. Here is how a World Wide Web dictionary, if you will pick up the term Gemeinschaftsgefühl. You type it in the browser. Community spirit, a sense of community, a public spiritedness. Wonderful. I thought, okay, we'll take that. What is Adler's definition of Gemeinschaftsgefühl? I'll read that to you. This is from a publication where they were still, at this point, trying to now explicate the difference between masculine protest, which I'm going to talk about, the aggression drive, and social interest. Is innate in human beings, it must be regarded as the most important regulator of the aggression drive. It is at the basis of any relationship of the child toward people, animals, plants, and objects, and signifies the cohesion with our life, the affirmation, the conciliation with it. Through Gemeinschaftsgefühl in its rich differentiations, parental love, filial love, sexual love, love of one's country, love of nature, art, science, love of humankind, acting together with the aggression drive, there comes about the general attitude a person takes, which actually constitutes his or her psychological life. So in other words, and this is something that is a common theme in Adler's writings, is social interest becomes the barometer of a person's mental health. So it's the sense of connectedness that fosters the good life, and disconnectedness that causes psychopathology. The key concepts of social interest, as just mentioned, now these are from Ansbacher's work. Social interest is an innate potentiality that must be consciously developed. It's an active striving. So as human beings, we're always in motion. We're always moving towards something. Social interest becomes that which sort of defines where we're going. It subsumes all forms of love. So it's not simply person to person, it's person to all. Social interest is an affirmative attitude toward life in general and all objects in the world. So as you look at objects in the world, you look at them lovingly. That would be a cornerstone of social interest. And finally, there's a readiness for responsibility. So social interest is being ready to be responsible. And something that, now, you know, Adler always would say that these are innate potentialities in children, but one of the most greatest responsibilities of parenting is to activate these potentialities in children. They typically will not come alive on their own. They might, but typically they would not. And so a great parental responsibility is igniting the flame of social interest. Without laboring over reading them each, Heinz Ansbacher in 1991 was asked to define the characteristics of social interest, or really what we would say is the characteristics of a socially interested person. And you will see here 12. A feeling of worth and value, courage and optimism, independence of opinion of others, overcoming common instead of private inferiority feelings, being a fellow human being and a friend, equal cooperative footing with fellow human beings, love of humankind, feeling at home in life, acquiescing in common advantages and drawbacks, harmony with the universe, cosmic feeling, religious and or ethical feelings, aesthetics judgment, and spontaneous social effort. Again, these would be what Ansbacher, when asked to define what is it, these would be the characteristics that he would list. Now, where do you think in Adler's life it came from? Anybody have any ideas about this? Because that's kind of the heart of what this is about this morning is, all right, you know, he's moving along, and some of you probably know he engaged with this whole life of the mind through an association with Sigmund Freud, an association which he ended in 1911, began in 1902, so for quite a while he sat in the psychodynamic circle. I'll talk a bit about that history, but just based on any guesses that you have, hunches, where did it come from in him, in Adler himself? Any ideas, any thoughts? Okay, Mona, you have to speak really loud because the room is filling up in the back. Where did it come from?
I would assume that partly it came from his Jewish heritage.
She's saying it partly came from his Jewish heritage. Interesting, because there is a connection there, very definitely. Okay? Virginia.
Maybe some of it came from him being involved with the circus people and sideshow people as a doctor.
She's referring to his time as a young physician in this sort of maybe blue-collar area of Vienna near the Prater Park. He worked in a practice where he saw many people who were either impoverished or they were making a living doing sort of exceptional things. They lived life with lots of disadvantages, but they were turning them into advantages. One example being circus performers. He did. He treated lots of circus performers at one time in his early practice. That could be. Where else? Vicki.
Maybe partially as a reaction against Freud's drive theory.
She's saying it might have come as a reaction against Freud's drive theory. Okay.
About hanging out with the Gemütlichkeit down at the pub.
Being in the pub. Oh yes, this was a man who was all about cigars, brandy, beer, and black coffee at 1 o'clock in the morning. And he died at age 67. Not a big surprise. You know? Well, actually, it probably came as much as anything from this. Adler was born in February 1870. He was born in an area of Vienna which was not highly Jewish. was interesting, the Adlers themselves, they acknowledged and celebrated some of the Jewish traditions and holidays. They were not, though, deeply devout Jews. They were not. But they, and his parents were not well-to-do, but they were sort of middle class. They lived in a couple of locations around Vienna, but they were not Jews who lived in the Jewish sectors of Vienna. They did not live in the ghettos. They lived in kind of the suburbs, if you will. And it would be sort of like South Minneapolis or West St. Paul, if you will. They didn't live in the urban, but they didn't live in the suburban. And these kids, there were 6 children. Adler was the second of 6. His eldest brother, as you might know, was named Sigmund, which was always an interesting thing for young Alfred. But at any rate, he was the second child, and what he heard from his parents was this kind of admonition or caution. You're a Jew, you're going to live and play with Christians, you've got to learn to get along with these people. You heard that over and over and over again. All his siblings did as well. And so they became very, very early on astute at mixing with kids different than they. And this was a very strong identity at that point in time. If you were a Jew in Vienna, you were a Jew in Vienna. But these kids weren't of that typical ilk. So they actually were playing with lots of Christian kids, but the parents kind of, cautioning them about getting along with people, So Adler remembered that frequently as he grew, saying a lot of what I learned as a child was to get along with people. I was counseled that way. Because if I let my Jewishness or Jewishness is whatever it would be, or this sort of the way I'm different sort of get in the way, if I trumped that too much, I might disassociate from people. So my orientation was always associating, getting along with, being part of the group. So as a child, I think he had this orientation. If you fast forward Adler's life now, he was not a particularly great student. He was pretty social. He was a good enough student to get himself through the gymnasium in Vienna and into medical school, so obviously he was fairly intelligent. But he wasn't an outstanding student, nor was he an outstanding medical student. There's no evidence that he was any kind of an excellent student, really, in med school. He graduated in 1895, and his first associations with practice were not in the more affluent areas. They were in areas that were somewhat like where he had grown up. And one of his first practices, this was just referred to, was in an area associated with this large park in Vienna called the Prater. Now, who's been to Vienna? Oh gosh, none. We all should make the pilgrimage. Well, maybe have you been there?
Yeah, but a long time ago.
Long time ago?
Just this touristy stuff.
Well, this park, if I had to guess, would be something like Loring Park. What Loring Park is to Minneapolis. And some of you heard me say this before. You know, in 1895 or 1900, we didn't have AMC, Rosedale cinemas. We didn't have all these venues for entertainment. People would gather in these parks. And this is where they would come for entertainment, to buy things. There was a lot of bartering, a lot of flea market type activity. Adler's practice was adjacent to this park, and so they did a lot of pro bono work. They saw poor. They saw some people who were pretty down and out, actually. And in this way, he got to see a side of life that was not the affluent high Vienna side, but more people, a lot of them transient people who were struggling to make it. And he noticed many times that some had a tenacity about living where they would join, like a circus, with physical deformities, and there was this great sense of overcoming, but overcoming through association. They did not move away, they moved towards all the time. He also became very interested in some of the social dynamics that were going on in Austria and Vienna. He was associated for a number of years with the Social Democratic Party. Some of you may know that. He was actually a great reader of Karl Marx. Marx had great influence on Adler's ideas. Adler himself began writing some kind of editorials that would show up in the Vienna press about, for example, the working conditions of certain professions in the area. One of the earliest works he had was about the tailoring trade in Vienna, where he was alerting the population, if you will, the populace, that these people work in these really adverse conditions where they were manufacturing or sewing clothing. He was starting to see this as a physician. He was seeing a lot of bronchial trouble. And he began saying, if we don't improve these working conditions for these folks, we're going to have on our backs, the backs of the city of Vienna, a real health crisis. So he had this kind of social consciousness growing, again associated with the Social Democrats. In 1902, and he used to, I don't know, you've heard this story before, but Adler always kept a postcard. But in 1902, he received a postcard from Sigmund Freud, who apparently he did not really know. He might have met him previously. And it's somewhat a mystery how Freud heard of Adler. It might have been through recommendations, it might have been through Freud's reading of the Vienna Press and seeing some of these commentaries that Adler had written. But at any rate, Adler is invited in 1902 to join the Freudian circle. And now he always kept the postcard because he would frequently be introduced as a follower, a disciple, a student, and he always said, I am none of the above. I was invited to this group to talk. One of the reasons I left the group, because the talk was not free. It was not an open dialogue. What was happening frequently was Freud is evolving this theory of personality development, and it was sort of like a court. Freud would speak, kind of present a topic, present an issue, give a little lecturette, and then the group would comment. What Freud was looking for really was clarity and affirmation. And Adler and some others in the group, it was not long after that Carl Jung joined up, they'd be sitting around and these people had an urge of their own to speak. Their own line of reasoning was beginning to form about the life of the mind, but their opinions were somewhat discouraged. Freud saw in Adler a great mind, and he kept trying to kind of nudge Adler into ways of kind of embracing the Freudian view. He made him editor of the journal. So Adler was one of the early editors of Freud's journal. Towards the end of Adler's association with Freud, Freud actually said, why don't you become president of the society? All these times trying to keep Adler in, but hook him in. And Adler at this point now, we're probably around 1908, 1909, 1910, Adler's theories about what was really driving the life of the mind, the development of the personality, were becoming more and more removed from Freud. I don't think Adler was ever saying to Freud, I discount what you say. I think what Adler was trying to say is there's more to what you're saying. That this is a whole social context, the sort of the pull of our social environment that leads us toward, that helps us kind of identify with and then form a personality. It's not simply a matter of what's going on within, it's within and without. But as you may know, in 1911 they had the great separation. The way it actually occurred was interesting. Adler actually resigned, but he was going to be fired. He knew that. There had been a series of lectures that he gave on commenting on Freud's concept of the sex drive and what Adler saw as alternatives to that theory. And basically, Freud put it in this context, well, having said that, can you stay? And Adler more or less said, I guess I can't. And he left. About 11 or 12 of the group left with Adler. What's interesting, in 1911-12, the first group they formed, the Adlerians, if you will, who left, or the people who left with Adler, was the Society for the Study of Free Psychoanalysis. That's what they called it. They did not call it individual psychology or anything like that. The first couple of years of their group, they called it the Society for the Study of Free Psychoanalysis. What they wanted to do was have an open, free discussion about these ideas. They didn't want it to sort of be master presenting to students or master presenting to audience and then audience commenting. It was not, none of them believed that only one person could hold the key. Adler renamed it in the early 1920s individual psychology. Of course, the war interrupted this endeavor as well. If you look at this handout, you're going to see some key dates. In the initial stages, Adler was involved in what he was calling then drive psychology, which is really what psychoanalysis is still today. Adler joins Freud's circle, one of the 4 charter members. This is the Vienna Psychoanalytic Society. They met on Wednesday evenings in Freud's living room in the original stages. Adler's first papers are about the aggression drive. He's saying now that I recognize this movement from within. It's going to be expressed in some way. In other words, it's going to come out. And what is it going to be that comes out? The genesis of this is the aggression drive. In 1911, shortly after the split, he introduces another concept which then makes his psychology, if you will, Adlerian psychology, very much a cultural phenomenon. That is the notion of the masculine protest. I think some of you have an understanding of that from our classes. For those who don't, what Adler began to say was, society presents the individuals with certain dynamics with which they struggle. It's also like almost like an isometric concept. And probably the most powerful dynamic is social, and it relates to our roles as men and women. And what begins to happen is this push-pull that we feel about the social dynamic created around our sex role. At that time, of course, and one would argue probably still the case today, it was a very male-dominant society in which we all lived. And Adler began to talk about how men and women both protest against this. And there's a great tension that comes, a great anxiety that comes from this protest. And that for women, it's being subjugated by the male-dominated model. The male model of socializing women causes a great tension in their ability to develop. For men, it centers more around the concept of what does it mean to be a real man? What does it mean to be feral? So this plays out in unique ways that women will fight against, as men will fight against. Of course, one of the pinnacles of Adlerian psychology is nobody is willing ultimately to submit. And so women, in many overt and covert ways, would fight against this dominance, as would men. But one way men could keep their position was to dominate women. In other words, men could be more male if they would keep the woman more female in terms of her second class or subjective role. So the masculine protest became kind of the extension of the aggression drive. Aggression towards what? Well, part of the theory there was this social dominance of this masculine protest. This is where, certainly now, Adler's now way outside the box. This is not something that was on the screen of the Freudian group. This idea that we have these social dynamics that have as much to do with the personality development as we do with these internal dynamics. Again, in 1908, Adler's actually started to introduce the idea of the social milieu and its impact. It wasn't until 1917 that the actual term social interest got introduced as a dynamic in the development of the personality. Again, this is now an extension of the masculine protest. And it sort of looks like this. A lot of theories go this way. You get this kind of an effect. So something has begun here. It crosses with something that's coming up here, which crosses with something that's coming up here. And the ultimate, where we are in the 1920s now, is the concept of social interest is fully developed. It's now going to become lodged in Adler's psychology. By 1925 or 1928, in those years, now he's speaking many different parts of the continent in Europe. He's also now guest lecturing frequently in the United States. His first tour here was in 1926. This is becoming more a pedestal of his theory, this idea of the social nature of human beings, or social connectedness. What is interesting is the Ansbachers have tried to follow that. Now, the first book that you might know that Heinz or Ansbacher did of sort of editing Adler's papers and talks was called The Individual Psychology of Alfred Adler. The latter book, which is trying to sort of trace his evolution and thinking, is called Superiority and Social Interest. Again, now, playing off the idea of what do we mean by superiority? Are we talking about superiority over task? Are we talking about superiority over others? And what is the interplay of social interest within that dynamic? Dreikers had a similar kind of, I would say, kind of ending. Adler's works have been noted to really evolve into three periods. The initial period of writings, which were probably 1902 to 1912, 1915, were more on the development of the personality, and it was very much based on drives. This is where the aggression drive was prominent. The second phase, which really started after the Second World War, which probably would be 1919 to probably the mid to late 1920s, was more about psychotherapy. Well, the theory had been developed. Now, how do you treat people? How do you help people? The last period of Adler's life, which would probably be the late 1920s until he died in 1937, it was very much lodged in what does it mean to live the good life? And this is one of the final books of Adler, Social Interest, A Challenge to Mankind. So what I find interesting there is Dreikers had a similar kind of trajectory. One of the last books that Dreikers wrote is social equality, the challenge of today. These are both thinkers, and it's not unusual. They sort of start in the specific and they move out to the general. So in the latter part of Adler's life, he's talking to all people, healthy and non-healthy, about what it means to live the good life. And what does it mean for society to perpetuate itself in productive ways? And so social interest now is a social part of the social fabric. It should be an ideal of societies, not even just individuals. So he keeps expanding as he moves through these different iterations of social interest. So the movement.
Now, social interest is derived from the concept of aggressive drives. Was that also initially derived from Nietzsche's will to power?
Right. He's referring to, Adler was a great reader of Nietzsche, and Nietzsche talked about this will to power. But where Nietzsche's will to power, I think, led out to this kind of idea of a superhuman, to Adler, it had to be tempered. It had to be, the will to power had to have a social context to allow people to live together. Otherwise, you have societal chaos, if you will, I think. So correct. Yes, Adler always would have cited Nietzsche as one of the 5 or 7 probably most influential writers that he read. Yes. That's an interesting connection. The will to power, Nietzsche's work, and Adler. So, yeah. Again, this idea of the dynamic that can't be suffocated, that we are moving towards something, we're all alive with motion, and we're directing it somewhere. How are we going to direct it? To what are we going to direct it? So there you have really kind of 3 phases. The early phase of Adler's writings talking about the aggression drive. Although he never abandoned these terms, it wasn't like he said, okay, let's forget that one, now we introduce this one. He built on them in this kind of a fashion. The second phase, greatly devoted to the masculine protest and its effect on people in terms of developing their lifestyle and their roles. The final phase is the influence of social interest, or the dynamic of social interest, as the barometer of one's mental health, but also the ideal of a society. The good societies, healthy societies move towards ultimate social interest. So he says to us, and this is the last paragraph, and this is where he kind of recounts his own history. Now this is lifted from a article called The Compulsion Neurosis. This is him writing in 1931. In 1908, I came upon the idea that every individual is actually always in a state of aggression, and I imprudently called this the aggression drive. However, I soon recognized that one is dealing here not at all with a drive, but with an attitude toward the tasks of life, which is partly conscious, partly not understood. Thus I arrived at the understanding of the social component of the personality, the degree of which is developed always according to the person's opinion about the facts and difficulties of life. So now we have this sort of interplay of self with society, and we start developing lots of notions that become really fundamental ideas in Adlerian psychology. For example, all problems are social problems. Fundamental to psychopathology are inferiority feelings, discouragement, and diminished or underdeveloped social interests. The way to healing, whether it's an individual, a family, a group, a society, is the generation or the manifesting of greater social interest. Adler had strategies in psychotherapy that were very direct and very linked to this, and in the intro class I even just throw out one, which is really cute. Adler sees somebody in his office, Gramercy Park, New York City, 1935, and a person comes in and he assesses the person, or believes the person is melancholic. We would say depressed today, melancholic. And so he might, as they're getting up to leave, he'd set the next session, he would say, oh, by the way, between now and the time we see each other again, I'd like you to do something. I'd like you to make a cup of tea for a friend. Just do that. And I'll see you in 2 weeks. That's a very Adlerian strategy. Why? Make a cup of tea for a friend. That's your homework assignment. Why?
Thinking about someone else.
You're thinking about somebody else. Now, if you're going to make a cup of tea for a friend, what do you have to do? You have to think of a friend. What else do you have to do?
You have to find a friend.
You have to go find a friend or identify a friend.
set up a time and prepare it?
You might have to prepare. Now prepare, yes.
Don't think about yourself.
You're starting to think about somebody else, right? And if you're going to have somebody over to your home for a cup of tea, what might you do?
You have to clean.
You might clean up. And many times, if you're going to have a cup of tea for a friend, might you also have something with the tea?
Absolutely.
Like what?
Brownies.
You might have cookies, you might have pastries. Now, in New York City in 1935, they really weren't Cub Foods and, you know, Rainbow Fresh. We didn't have that. What we had were stores that specialized in teas and coffees. And there's one that's, I think, a lot like what there were all over the city of New York in 1935. It's over in Highland. It's called the Tea Source, if you've ever been there. You walk in. Have you ever been to the Tea Source over at, yeah. What is it like walking in there?
Well, it's like a living room sort of feeling. It's real comfortable. It's real welcoming.
And what grabs you when you come in the door?
Smells.
Smells. Aroma. Yes. What else grabs you?
It would be a meeting place or a gathering.
There's a buzz. If you go to the Tea Source over there by, I think it's Ford Parkway in Highland, there's a buzz when you go in. There are lots of people in there, and there's aroma, and you can't help be affected by the buzz. And I'm sure this is what Adler understood. So when it came to strategies for healing, these little tasks became really critical to moving the person out. Now, I have not, I'm sure there are exceptions to this, but by and large, I don't hear Adlerian therapists talk about sending a client home to journal. To me, that is not a common Adlerian technique. Why not? What'd you say?
It's not outwardly focused, engulfing somebody else. It's you just sitting down and writing your thoughts.
It's a very inward, introspective. Now, there may be times when it would be very appropriate to have somebody journal. I'm not saying that wouldn't happen. But the key notion in psychotherapy for Adlerians is to move people out, to get them going again, to get them reconnected.
Connect with other people.
To connect with other people.
To journal with another person.
Now, maybe you can journal with other, yes, maybe I would be very fond of chat rooms. I don't know, but you might be.
I've actually had them do autobiographies, but they have to go back to family to get vignettes.
Sure.
To do an autobiography.
Thinking of somebody else in your journaling, we could probably say could be very helpful. The last page of what you have here is something many of you have seen before, but it's a very rich reminder of how this plays out in the development of the child. And you know, probably nobody spent as much time thinking in the early stages, at least, of writing about the life of the mind, thinking about children and their struggles and their development than Adler did himself. And of course, it played out in the, for example, the 22 or 24, nobody really knows how many, child guidance clinics that he established in Vienna back in the 20s, which were quite successful until the fascist regime moved into Austria and then certainly permeated the city of Vienna. Now, long after the Nazis came in, and this is when a lot of the Jewish intellectuals and people of Adler's type had to make a decision about what was happening because they were swept up in political chaos, really. Well, Adler was very interested in children's connectedness, their connectivity, how they see themselves in the context of others. This is Henry Stein. Some of you know who this is. He's sort of a powerhouse Adlerian out there in northwestern Washington. A wonderful presenter, if you ever have a chance to do a workshop with him. And he develops this, his website is full of these maps, these maps in terms of how we develop. And this is a very, very interesting one that shows how a child with more or less social interest moves to the left side or to the right side, to the more socially interested, the more socially useful side, or to the less socially interested side, which is the side which leans us towards a probability of psychopathology. Again, a cornerstone idea here is that moving away from people, isolating oneself, not putting oneself in the service of others, is something that could breed, not all the time, but certainly could breed mental disturbance. Again, it gets back to the connectedness of human beings, and this is, I think, probably close the point. Adler began to talk about all failures in life are people who do not manifest social interest. It's diminished social interest. So we come to the end of his life, and of course, it got very kooky because he died 67 years old in 1937. He hadn't deputized anybody at this point. The war is not long to break out, and so there really was a vacuum at the point of Adler's death, whereby he just didn't have the lineage of people to surround him. After the Second World War, there were groups that jumped right into the front of this. Of course, Dreikers led one, Furtmüller led another. There were some others over in Europe. These clans sort of developed, started to look at Adler again. But it was a psychology that's probably where, if it lost any ground quickly, it's where it lost its ground. It was it became kind of disorganized around the Second World War. So what I want to do in closing, and I don't think you can see this enough, I'm going to have you look at I want you to hear Alfred Adler talk to us about social interest. Many of you have seen this once. Some of you have seen this 3 times. Let's wait till these all get around. Mona? While they're looking.
You might know that my earliest years of teaching, I taught with Heinz Ansbacher.
Mona's saying that in her earliest years of teaching, she taught with Heinz Ansbacher. I'm going to touch Mona.
Me too, because then I'm once removed, right? So I'll touch you.
Would you stand up and just tell us a little bit about him?
Well, yes, it was my early years of teaching at the University of Vermont, and I taught with Heinz Ansbacher. And there are a couple of things that I really remember about him. I remember this was the McCarthy yearbook, and I remember Heinz standing in the doorway saying, "Anybody who's worth his salt has been a communist at some point." And of course, that was the time when we had to make decisions. Are we going to sign this thing that says we're loyal to the country, or what? The other thing I remember about him is talking about the Stanford Binet. I think that's the IQ test that has the question, what should you do if you find an envelope in the street that's sealed and addressed and has a new stamp? Remember that question? Well, you get credit for the correct answer if you say mail it. But he pointed out that's only if you have social interest. If you don't have social interest, you just don't bother. You walk over it. Yeah. So those are a couple of things that I remember about Heinz.
He died 3 years ago at age 101, I think.
Yeah.
This is Betty Lou Bentner, who presented last night, you might know. Your Betty Lou, stand up, please.
Well, can I add a story or two about Heinz? Is that okay?
Oh, please, no, we welcome this.
Well, I used to go to Vermont too. I was only 12 at the time when we used to go up to Vermont and join some of his classes. And I went up to him once and I said, "Dr. Ansbacher, I love your book, but it's really hard to get through." And he said in his best accent, "That's because you started at the beginning." Actually, I did. And he said, no. He said, the first 3 chapters are history and how all this got started. He said, just skip over that, start at chapter 4. So, for all of you who are going through that book, start at chapter 4.
Now you tell.
And the other note was when I wrote to him when Rowena died. Now, most of the times you just send somebody a sympathy card and that's the end of it, but not with Heinz. He sent you back a thank you note for your sympathy card. And he wrote to tell me that up until the day she died, her lifestyle was still intact, that even through her Alzheimer's, he said that she was cherished by the staff and that she still remained cooperative and congenial and helpful right to the very end. Just a very long note, just for a sympathy card. Great guy.
Great.
I would like to add one other thing.
Please stand.
I'm sorry. I used to do talks on a healthy woman as a crazy person. And Heinz urged me to write the book because he felt it was so important for us to get the importance of whatever you want to call it, women's equality, liberation. He felt very strongly about that.
So did you write the book?
Yeah, no. No, I talked a lot.
Well, it is interesting when you read Adlerian psychology. Whenever you read Adler's work, he does not ever say the opposite sex. He says the other sex, which is an interesting way of pulling us together. together, when you start thinking of opposites, you're polarizing.
Right.
So his reference to men and women would always be in the context of the other sex. That's just something you'll note that when you read Adlerian psychology, you'll see what I mean. Well, I make this analogy. When you go to spring training as a professional baseball player, in almost all the spring training camps, they have DVDs that they'll run in the training rooms. And one of them is Ted Williams, the year he batted .406. He was the last major league hitter to, in a full season, to bat over 400. He batted .406, I think it was 1940 or 41. And they always said that Williams had, an incredibly perfect swing. He was just an elegant baseball player, and just keep watching his swing, So here we got, these young guys walking around these locker rooms with these tapes playing of Ted Williams in 1940 or 41. Well, watching this is a little bit like this for me, because it's amazing that they captured Adler on tape. How many have seen this? How many have not seen this? Oh, you're in for a treat, okay. They pulled Adler in front of a tree, it looks like to me. I presume he's in the United States, and said, talk. And he's standing there, he's not very camera proficient, I guess I would say. He's camera a lot, so he's staring at the camera, you'll see right now. He's just glaring at it, and all of a sudden this person, you'll hear the voice go to talk, or says something like that, and he starts to speak. But what's interesting is they captured in these two little vignettes the essence of Adlerian psychology as it connects to social interest. So I thought, well, this would be a perfect time to show you this, just so you can hear Adler's voice if you've never heard it before, and to hear him embed this concept of social interest in his teaching. So I'm going to ask two of you if you could read in a nice, that's okay, Dave will be all right. Okay, that'll be all right. Could somebody read take one, nice and slowly and in a loud voice, and then we'll have somebody else read take two, and then I'll show it to you, and then we'll do Q&A. Or good shape. Vicki.
I'm going to
Stand and read as
okay.
a professional reader.
Oh my.
Yes.
The socially mistaken pattern is built up in the first 4 or 5 years. Mostly, we find reasons for it, such as imperfect organs, or that the child has been pampered, or that we find hated children, as among orphans sometimes, illegitimate children, ugly children, not wanted children, and so on. This pattern is fixed and can be changed only if we are able to convince this child about their mistakes, or later in life where we could eliminate the mistakes in their patterns. In preventive work, we can reduce such mistaken patterns by educating children rightly. We could make the school an instrument of social progress to recognize the mistakes in their beginning and to accomplish more social interest among the pupils. Later in life, it is more difficult and it requires individual treatment to convince such a person and how to change him. In this way, we are sure that the key of individual psychology, identifying mistaken patterns, is the most important and worthwhile key, and we can guess much better than with other methods what is the mistake made in the childhood and how to correct it.
Great, wonderful. A reader for take two?
Don't read it in German.
She said, don't read it in German.
I was toying with you in an accent. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I come to the following conclusion. I discovered 20 years ago the inferiority complex, which had proved to be a very worthwhile key for understanding human nature and personalities. As I have explained, an individual is a unity from beginning of life, and his style of life cannot be changed without understanding the mistakes made in the roots, and these roots are lying in the family life in which each individual is formed and molded. So we can find that his great striving to overcome the difficulties of life, his striving, going on from a feeling of inferiority and leading toward the goal of superiority, is always combined with a certain individual degree of social interest. We find in each expression, in each movement of each individual, how he has used his training for social interest, and so when he meets later in life the problems which can be solved rightly only if they are really solved in a great social feeling, then it will be decided if he is adjusted rightly or not. So we find at last that all the failures in life, problem children, neurotic and psychotic persons, delinquents, suicides, drunkards, and so on, are always lacking social interest. And it is not only this interest, but in the same way they are also lacking courage in understanding the right training for the solution of the social problems.
Great, thank you very much. Again, who is going to see Alfred Adler for the very first time? Quite a few of you. Oh, okay. Well, gee, I'm thrilled. All right. Yeah, wonderful. All right. Here he is. It's a pretty good, the tape looks pretty good, and you'll hear him just fine. He's got a very thick, as you might imagine, Viennese brogue. Well, I may have to rewind it a little bit. I might have skipped ahead when I was. This is actually now on YouTube. I'll have to adjust the volume a little bit.
The social mistaken pattern is built up in the first 4 or 5 years. Mostly we find as reasons for it imperfect organs, or that the child had been pampered, or that we find hated children is among orphans, sometimes illegitimate children, ugly children, not wanted children, and so on. This pattern is fixed and can be changed only if we are able to convince this child about the mistakes, or later in life. Therefore we could eliminate the mistakes in this pattern, either in prevention, to educate the family how to educate children rightly, or we could make the school an instrument of the social progress, to recognize the mistakes in their beginning and to accomplish more social interest among the pupils. Later in life it is more difficult, and it must be an individual treatment, how to convince such a person and how to change him. In this way, we are sure that the key of the individual psychology is the most important and worthwhile key, and we can guess much better, as with other methods, what is the mistake made in the childhood and how to correct it. I come to the following conclusion. I discovered 20 years ago the inferiority complex, which had been proved to be a very worthwhile key for understanding human nature and personalities. As I have explained, an individual is a unity from the beginning of life, and his style of life cannot be changed without understanding the mistakes made in the roots. And these roots are lying in the family life in which each individual is formed and molded. So we can find that his great striving to overcome the difficulties of life, his striving going on from a feeling of inferiority and leading towards the goal of superiority, is always combined with a certain individual degree of social interest. We find in each expression, in each movement of each individual, how he has used his training for social interest, and so when he meets later in life the problems which can be solved rightly only if they are really solved in a great social feeling, then it will be decided if he is adjusted rightly or not. So we find at last that all the failures in life, problem children, neurotic and psychotic persons, delinquents, suicides, drunkards, and so on, are always lacking social interest. And it is not only this interest, but in the same way they are also lacking courage, understanding, and the right training for the solution of the social problems.
The last comment, and then we'll talk a bit. If one were interested in such a thing, to read it. This is probably the best biography done of Adler. We have it here. It's available on the net. You can find it through Amazon.com pretty cheaply. It's called The Drive for Self. It's called Alfred Adler and the Founding of Individual Psychology. But it is a very well-researched, probably the most impartial and most accurate biography. It's fairly recent. Edward Hoffman is still very much alive. I've communicated with him before. He resides in New York City, and actually what he is a contract biography writer. And it's an interesting profession. What happens is people contact him apparently, and he does these in 3- and 4-year waves. He goes under contract, companies that have leadership that they want to learn the history of and have in their archives and so forth. They'll contract with Hoffman to write these kinds of books. So he's written a number of books about people, just people. It must be an interesting way to make a living. But Hoffman did this book about 15 years ago, or 10 now, I suppose. What is the publication date? But what is so special about it is it's such a, where am I looking? 1994. It's a wonderful look at Adler's childhood and young adulthood. That's what he really captures well. The rest of Adler's life has been well researched, by other people. There are lots of articles written. But what Hoffman did is really dig out Adler's very early years in Vienna, where he lived, what his family life was like, who he associated with, how he was as a person, his personality, and so forth. So it's a nice insight to get back at some of these ideas that really were foundation ideas, I think, to the formation of his personality. Like his parents cautioning them that as Jewish children living in Christian neighborhoods, they really had to be careful about getting along with people. That was an admonition the parents frequently gave to kids. And that's well identified and brought out in this book. I think those are really the seeds or the origins of Adler's notion of social interest. It emanates back to his childhood. So, having said that, I am not the expert here. We have many experts. So let's talk a bit. I'll direct traffic from up here, but I'm only doing this to direct traffic. I'm not an expert.
Can I just ask, has anyone not gotten the evaluation sheet? I need that. You need these handed in before you leave.
We only have, we've got about 5 minutes if I can let you out a few minutes early. So let's take about 5 minutes or less if you want. And people can make comments. I ask that you just, when you're making a comment, just speak loudly so we all can hear you. The people raising their hand to make comments or get evaluation sheets, I'm not sure. But you're going to make a comment. Esther, stand up and talk.
I have a question about how Alfred Adler would have viewed what happened.
Could you speak a little louder?
Okay, I'm sorry. I have
Is there any left on this?
Question, curiosity, how Alfred Adler would have viewed what happened with the Holocaust. He died just, before it happened. He, witnessed what was happening, and with the fact that he, shifted from being Jewish to Lutheran and was asked to kind of, be involved in more of the Christian community than the Jewish community. How he would view what happened to the Jewish population in Europe.
She's asking about, we're speculating now.
Right.
What would Adler's view be of what should have happened or what our responsibilities would have been in the face of the growing Holocaust? The floor is open. What do you think? It's a wonderful question.
I guess I'm thinking that I think it was I don't know if my history is a little flaky here, but I believe when the Nazis rolled into Denmark and they wanted to round up all the Jews, the king of Denmark or somebody, they set this up that basically all the Danes, no matter what their predilection was, they all said we're Jewish. And I was thinking in terms of social interest. The whole country kind of pulling together to protect the Jews by sort of saying, I'm a Jew, I'm a Jew, I'm a Jew.
think Adler was wonderful sponsor there. I hope you all heard that. That was a wonderful. Yeah, so maybe we'll just leave that one. That's a great, we'll leave that as a master's project.
Well, I just didn't
The
know,
undergraduate school.
because he has a son that also factors, so maybe his son had some sense of what his father's reaction was, or his son did. Is there any?
I don't know. That would have been Kurt. I don't know. Joe?
Certainly, standing in the face of something like the Holocaust and World War II, there's nothing but horror for any sane individual, and certainly Adlerian theory is so counter towards this sort of aggression. Interestingly enough, Jung's theory was very embraced by the Nazi Party at that time, and it was instrumental in the creation of sort of a pseudo-national history.
Vicki?
I just noticed looking at Stein's chart, if you look on the right side, distance, rivalry, exploitation, self-centeredness, self-indulgence, superiority over others, self-protection, self-enhancement, you would get the actions of individuals in the Holocaust taken to, extreme, but that's one thought about it.
Excellent question. Some other comments or thoughts? Yes?
I'm just thinking, what do you know of the influence of World War I on Adler's thinking, as opposed to, certainly we can speculate about World War II, but that was a time when he actually lived through, and did he make comment on this?
Yes, oh yes, he was absolutely mortified. He came out of World War I, where he served 4 years in the Austrian army, 2 years almost on the front. He was right on the front treating the most maimed who were still living. He said, this is well, I'm paraphrasing. I'm not even paraphrasing, I'm just I think he just saw it as the dumbest way to solve problems that could possibly be used. I mean, he was, if anything, I think Adler became what we might call almost a pacifist through, now he did say, and interesting enough, people would say, well, that means he was totally against war. It goes back to Esther's comment. He didn't say that. I think he said that there are certain times when to stop human, like genocide and so forth, that military intervention may have to happen. But he certainly came out of the Second World War very discouraged about this use of military power to solve world problems. He saw that as just nuts, crazy. And he wrote about that. I mean, that was very much part of his doctrine. Yep. A couple more comments and we'll close up. Karen.
Well, how about Adler's view of heading off in this right direction for today's economic crisis?
Now, speak up and clarify the question. I'm not sure we understand the question. What are you're looking at the chart, right?
I'm looking at the chart, the micro concept map, and I'm wondering what Adler's view would be today of our economic crisis and how we seem to have gone off in this right direction on the chart.
Anybody want to speculate about Adler's view of Wall Street and the bailout and all of that?
Come to my talk at noon. We'll talk about it.
Who's going to talk about it at noon? Oh, that's good. That's a good segue.
Well, I see two opposite directions. One, social interest might lead us all to join together and participate in this rescue plan, or the rescue plan might be seen as pampering of Wall Street.
Wonderful comment. Wonderful comment. All right, I think we're done. Why don't we do this? Take your mini conversations out to the coffee table. You know where it is. It's down by the media center. And thank you very much. So your Adlerian Day is launched. Thank you.